One of the first things that I'd like to kind of start off is to really identify the profit draining inefficiencies, right? And how do we identify them overall as we are running our day-to-day business? We are constantly super focused, going at 100 miles an hour, trying to grow sales, brand awareness, just expand our market reach. But we often underlook of what happens behind the scenes. How is the product actually gets developed from the concept to the production? What are the steps have been taken? Where are our resources been allocated? And often we hear very much about issues about long lead times in procurement, in addition to production, right? Excessive inventory levels causing the cash flow strains, fragmented communications between departments, and kind of leading up to redundancy and work that needs to be repeated over and over again, which then at the end of the day causes frustrations of your teams, underperformance, as well as under profitability. So kind of talking a little bit more about it, I'd love to hear, Mario, if you guys are experiencing any of those things, symptoms in your operations currently.
Yes, we are really experiencing symptoms as far as operational growth, as far as making sure that we have the right people in the right places, especially for our supply chain down to our meticulous QC that we always look to improve on and do better, especially with our watches and eyewear, because we're definitely in that premium space of ensuring everything down to our German 5 barrel hinges and the eyewear, which makes everything, steaming, stern, and making sure everything just goes with the face and whatnot correctly. And testing, making sure that everything is correct as far as like the inches and whatnot to make sure that everything is focalized for the customer face and meticulating that down to the website for our faces and eyeglass shape for the facial shape. Excuse me, get that wrong. For the facial shape perfection for the eyewear, because that's a key component for conversions, customer loyalty, and overall just efficiency and having a high standing reputation as a company online. So those little meticulous things really do matter, and making sure that we're on top of that is really important.
Absolutely, 100%. And what kind of tools, I guess, do you have in place currently that you are able to track some of those inefficiencies and detect them early enough so that you can be able to treat the root cause versus treating a symptom later on?
We really use a lot of focus groups internally, and we use Zapier as far as like our outreach, and we get feedback from our customers. And we use a lot of Google Analytics, is looking to see what trends and what our target audience, what our particular ages. We really target between 27 to 40.
Mm-hmm.
That's our bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
Just ensuring like what else are they into as far as interest, behavior, other brands that they're wearing, what time of year are they wearing specific particular eyewear shapes and watches, and what colors are they wearing. Just really making sure that we really hone in on that modern minimalist space and incorporating that feedback and really making it authentic within our story.
Interesting, very good. And I love that you mentioned customer feedback loops, teams
Hmm.
feedback loops, and those are going to be
Hmm.
very, really critical. And we're going to be talking more about those tools as well, because
Hmm.
those are very important to be able to keep the finger on the pulse, right?
Definitely.
With what's happening within your business under the hood. So I
Definitely. Definitely.
absolutely agree with you. And the research shows that inefficiencies in the supply chain operations alone can
Mhm.
adore up to 15% of the company's gross margin annually. So, for example, misaligned in forecasting can lead to excess inventory that not only ties up cash flow, but also increases warehouse costs and markdowns. So thinking about those kind of more, in those steps of what else can we do, right? Where can we actually uncover some little golden nuggets that will end up piling up into a cost savings, large cost savings for us? Kind of curious to see also what areas of inefficiencies you have noticed kind of within your organizations that you have potentially not able to address.
We have a space. It's kind of similar to Lululemon. That's what a lot of our customers really wear too. We made too much section for what you talked about as far as particular things that might not sell at a specific season. Like yellow gold isn't necessarily too popular in the fall and winter months. So we might do a sale on particular watches and eyewear that might go with that specific watch.
Mm,
And we really pay attention really to the buying behavior of that, even down to the whole human psychology aspect of if a price ends in nine, typically that's discounted. So we
correct.
really make sure that we have that whenever it's on sale. And even from, and this might even sound too small of being meticulous, but specifically for growing premium brands where that second digit, if it's like a $210, I'll give you an example of that. How that one is smaller than a two and then it ends in that zero, that's a normal price. We pay attention to how people buy there and where how that season lists look from post holiday to Valentine's Day and Valentine's Day to spring. Like how does that pricing structure really work? We pay attention to our competitors and how they place that, and just really be cognizant of what's working out there in the market, and really paying attention to our price margins and really being comfortable with what's going to work for us internally too.
But then operationally, what is your
Hmm.
process to be able to get to that frequency of updating your pricing as well as keeping the really close look at what the prices might potentially need to be?
Data analysis and really talking a lot with our manufacturers overseas.
Mm.
Really seeing like what's going to be trending in time is specifically for our specific area of modern minimalism. What are they seeing as far as like the colorways that may or may not be popular? What is going to be particular for our brand personality, our brand aesthetic, and really paying attention to how that fits the customer need, because we really are like that front facing, customer aspect. And that goes back to what we talked about previously as far as like the focus groups and even using social media for like polls and whatnot. Like, what do you guys want to see from us next? And we already might have like an idea from our manufacturer, which will be like our first or second step before we do like our sketching and design and all of those steps that we take. And then we go to the feedback to our customers, which makes us in the end make smart investments, because that data analysis and having that constant feedback and that constant relationship building over the years builds that know, like, and trust factor.
Well, and you just brought up onto a really interesting kind of point here, right? So you've mentioned to the point that you have a breadth of assortment that you're
Hmm.
constantly analyzing and figuring it out what potentially might need to go on sale and how are you going to be
Hmm.
able to restructure the pricing and so forth.
Hmm.
Which interestingly enough, that falls into one of the really key elements of identifying the efficiencies. In your case, it would be an efficiencies of your assortment overall
Hmm.
would be the
Right.
Pareto, right? Pareto method of applying the 80-20 rule, right?
Hmm.
Understanding of what is the 20% of your, whether it's an assortment of whether, a particular price point or
Hmm.
particular color that actually
Hmm.
going to drive 80% of your revenue and overall historically drives 80% of the revenue.
Hmm.
Everything else besides that, beyond that would be a noise, right? It would be the potentially even a waste of a tail that you might need
Hmm.
to not even focus on and chop it off at one point, once you
Hmm.
deplete the inventory and really truly focus on your core and actually buying more product within your core values so that you'll be able to sell and grow your business that as well. So that's, of course, one of the ways applying that into the merchandising strategies and looking at assortment, but that also could be applied operationally as well. And when we talk
Yes.
about operationally is going from a process of someone on your team who is actually deciding, right, that I need to check XQ, and then what
Hmm.
next steps are they actually going to take
Hmm.
to be able to get to the final answer of here's what I actually need to do with the SKU. And so
Hmm.
then once we analyze that process, once you map out that process as an example, we are
Hmm.
then be able to identify the steps that are actually customer value driven steps, and then
Hmm.
we can identify the steps are potentially just completely non-value added to the customer, and they're just inefficiencies of a process itself. Is there maybe a way to automate that information flow from your vendor into your vendor portals, as an example,
Hmm.
into so that you could be able to draw that data from the reporting and then be able to be more efficient than versus going to each individual supplier and have this conversation on a regular basis, like, which eats up the time and resources of your buying team in this particular case. So thinking about what that process actually is, and from the process user, what steps they actually need to take within that particular segment of process we just discussed, and really analyzing it down to and making it as efficient as possible. So this could be one of the ways of doing it, right? We also want to look at hidden inefficiencies potentially in the production. So if you are doing your own manufacturing, those are going to be really applicable, especially from understanding what happens once your manufacturing facility receives that, whether it's a cutting ticket or the order to start the manufacturing, and what does that actually
Set the
happen?
alarm for when?
And what does that actually happen? How does it actually flows into the next steps of your production? Where's the raw materials are coming from and how that gets pulled? A lot of times what you're going to see in inefficiencies and potentially is because majority of supply chains are still very traditional push systems, where now we're starting to see more and more, and we constantly I try to update supply chains of our clients into pull systems. Not only that it allows you to be much more closer to your cash dollars, right, and cash flow, and be able to predict and produce to the actual demand of the consumer versus producing huge things in bulk and storing them, and then figuring out how do I need to put sales on my product. Right. So there potentially would be maybe looking at a different model if, of course, it's available within the product and the manufacturing processes. So looking at those type of inefficiencies, but a lot of times inefficiencies are hidden in small steps of approvals. How long did that take from a product development team, sending it to the supplier, and from the supplier communicating the changes of your product and back and forth? And how did that process really looks like, and potentially finding optimizations there. Now, as you start to look at your end-to-end processes, as you can start to see me, that it's not really about mapping just a procurement process or mapping just a supply chain overall process or logistical process. It's really important to at one point connect them all together and analyze it on a broader scale. This is how we could be able to find the maximize inefficiencies and truly maximize our optimization of our processes. And sometimes we see them where we throw away 40% of non-value added steps with an end-to-end process, because while the processes itself were built, majority of them are built in a silo of per department, right, or per the need of the business. And very seldom we find companies who actually did take a due diligence and taking a step back and trying to integrate all those processes together to make sure that there's a seamless flow. And so as the company grows, a lot of times we get asked a question, and actually, funny enough, we just had a question that came in very similar on that. How often should I audit my value chain, value chain, and ensuring that it remains efficient? So a couple of things that we want to kind of bring up, where auditing should ideally be done on a quarterly for dynamic businesses, and on annually for more stable operations. However, if you also wanted to take a look at and really truly take a step back and look at your end-to-end process, every time you're making a big jump in terms of growth of revenue sales. So let's give an example. If you are a $10 million business today and your goal is to get to $20 million by the end of 2025, we got to look at your processes, right? So if think of every $10 million you've got of revenue that you're adding onto your business, you need to reevaluate your end-to-end processes, because you might actually need some extra systems to be in place to become more efficient. You potentially might need to relook how your data flows and how you are gathering that data overall from the consumer, starting from the consumer all the way to the data flow within the internal data flow of information, going again from the design team all the way to logistical and procurement teams, to be able to ship that product later on to their end-to-end customer. So thinking about that is going to be very critical, and we'll dive in a little bit more of how to do that as we have in this conversation further. The other thing that I wanted to kind of think about is, a lot of times, majority of why we do this is because we're trying to reduce the lead time, right? Or we're trying to optimize the inventory or streamline our buying process overall. But often it also yields in the quickest financial results. So, when we are talking about to our stakeholders and board members of our companies, we try to always report back on the quickest financial result of how we're going to get to the bottom line profitability and how we're going to increase it, right? One way of doing it with margins, and one of the, looking at the product margins and hopefully trying to increase sales and so forth. The other way is to actually look under the hood and see what's happening operationally and where the inefficiencies are hidden, so that you can be able to, even if you stay steady with your sales, you are still able to be more profitable on the bottom line. So those are going to be why we're having this conversation discussions, because unfortunately that is the most underlooked section of our industry, right? Anytime when we look at consumer goods, fashion industry, we unfortunately somehow falling into this where we're not so hyper focused on operation efficiencies and really more focused on margins and growing our sales. Amari, do you guys feel the same way on your end?
Definitely. And this was a area of opportunity that we had on our first couple years of business. When we started in 2019, we didn't really have a section to hyper focus on anything related to SKUs and UPCs and properly preparing ourselves to do B2B business and having those conversations with our manufacturers and internally to start the vertical integration process to see how that is going to look as far as sampling, getting the premium materials that we would need, and how that is going to infiltrate into the market to successfully transition into having long-standing product for our customers before we even get to the MOQ process and how long that particular lead time can take. And once we got to that step, it's like, how can we prepare for delays or anything with even just for our physical goods, tariff fees and product delays and shipment delays. So making sure that we have those open conversations just from the logistics aspect and the supply chain aspect, and making sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's, because a lot of things are going to be trial and error, right? Especially if, with you being a growing business to a multi-trillion dollar business like Apple. Like we've seen them make errors in front of our eyes. We forgive them every year with the iPhone, right? So making sure that's completely, how we can scale down any particular mistakes that we can see as you're talking about, and making sure that we pretty much take care of those mistakes before they even happen, so we can build that relationship and have those efficient operations. Now 5 to 6 years later, so going into our 6 year, is super important, and now we're able to see the differences and put out those fires before they even happen.
100%, 100%.
Mhm.
And one of the things also to also consider, right, as we are looking to some of those inefficiencies, is looking
Mhm.
at asking your team, or anytime there is a delay or anytime there is an inefficiency, is to not be afraid to ask the 5 whys, right? Because
Mhm.
one of the really key tools is to really dig down to the root cause, because often we are stopping at the why number two and we are going full blows and trying to solve the problem. But then in reality, we're not actually treating the root cause of why these problems are happening in the first place. So it's really important to continue to digging down and trying to understand it, and having, to your point, like how you are collaboratively having this conversation so with your team on a constant basis, to making sure that you are able to find those inefficiencies and solve them in real times. But it's also important to think about how to put control measures in place. So one of the other things that we are often see, that even if we do optimize the processes and we are becoming more efficient, then how do we making sure that it does not go off the scale, right? So that it continues to stay in control. So setting up some of those control measures and adding them to your systems and dashboards so that you could be able to monitor your efficiencies of those particular optimized processes is going to be very critical. So the moment it goes out of the control, you could be able to immediately address that with your team, address the root cause of why that happened, and be able to eliminate that piece as well. Absolutely, absolutely. Now, thinking about kind of taking even a step further and thinking about how can we apply the lean and agile principles to quickly adapt to processes, right? Driving sustained profit increases. What would be the potentially some of the opportunities here? One of them would be transitioning to pool-based supply chain, like I mentioned earlier in our call, and to really minimizing the overproduction and markdowns, which is one of the probably number one profitability driver that drives it down, right? When we're talking about entire retail businesses. So this is going to be very critical to take a look at and potentially evaluate with your suppliers, or even maybe potentially find your backup suppliers that can give you the flexibility of pool, turning it into more of a pool-based versus push-based supply chain. The other thing about it is to how can we create lean manufacturing processes and processes just overall to reduce the waste. So one of the things that we started our call, even though it was not process related, but more on the merchandise and assortment related, but it's also thinking about how can we make our assortment lean as well, right? It's not about more variety. It's all about finding that sweet spot of what your customer is responding to and what they know you for, and grow that and go much more deeper into that, right? So that it really becomes the authenticity to your brand, and versus wasting your resources on the noise or the tail end that we are usually would speak, right? The other thing to think about also is smaller interactive process changes that allow regular feedback and rapid adjustments, right? Kaizen would be one of the greatest tool for this. And we do recommend this to do, to educate the team as well as be able to adapt that as part of your continuous improvement culture, in order for you to be able to really solve quickly some of the inefficiencies. It doesn't, every inefficiency, once you dig to the root cause, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to disrupt your process, stop everything, and optimize everything from the beginning till the end and move forward. Sometimes we're able to get the key stakeholders, and very importantly, get process users into the same room, and with the whiteboard and sticky tapes, as we always love, and be able to truly identify with the fishbone diagram, or whether you do a 5 whys or combination of risk assessments to what the root cause is, and brainstorm through how we can be able to solve that. But at the same time, always keeping in mind our end-to-end process, to making sure that it doesn't become just a patch, but it actually becomes a true solution and permanently solves it and builds up to your strong foundation for you be able to grow over time. Mario, I would love to hear a little bit more how you guys are, 'cause you've mentioned that that's exactly what you guys are doing, and that seems like what your culture is. I'd love to hear it from you, and I'm sure our viewers would love to hear as well from a real world example. How did that really impact your business?
You mentioned two great points I took some notes on. That's just definitely going to dig into the question. You talked about the backup suppliers and making the assortment lean. We had a lot of issues starting out with specific areas just in real time with our physical goods, because we had a supplier that didn't meet our standard for ensuring that the customer had a premium product. And if we so that means we have to tighten up our QC. So every single stage of our quality control, from supply chain on down to testing, sampling, and again, how we just talked about that whole time frame for making sure that all of our pre-orders were in on time before we even got there. You even mentioned the point, goes to the next point, making that assortment lean. What are we known for? What do the customers like from us? And how can we matriculate that in-house to make sure we're paying attention to that data, to ensure that, one, like you said, we stay authentic, we deepen our commitment to making sure we stay front facing and customer pleasing, but making sure that our cultural aesthetic internally and incomparable really replicates that, because we don't want the customers to be the walking billboard for us. We want for incomparable to be the walking billboard for them. So making sure that we have that just internally, like you said, the interactive processes, that backup supplier, we had to make sure that we did more research, build those relationships, see who's certified in certain areas. As far as the sustainability aspect, that's really important for us too. Like all of that becomes important before we even slap a price tag or UPC on anything. So we had to again learn from that trial and error and really have that relationship building aspect, be more meticulous with our quality and control, have that follow up, make sure that we're really meticulous from the potential pre-order aspect to the release aspect, the sample aspect, to really hold ourselves accountable and really hold our manufacturers accountable as well. So those are the steps that we really take. And I really want to make sure that I commented on both of those because those are super important from a physical goods aspect.
100%. Thank you. This is really great insight as well. And thank you for sharing your own actual real life experience, because I'm sure many of us will kind of wonder, well, yes, that's all great in theory, but how does that actually apply, right? And especially in our business. The other thing that we often underlook, but we always talk about is the agility, right? And it's agile principle in retail. It's such a quick capsule that if you're able to bring in capsules or product to test the consumer demand quickly, right? It can improve your sell-through rates by 40% and statistically. One of our clients used this method to reduce sales markdowns by half. I mean, that's huge. So thinking about, again, the agility of what can we do to be able to get the product much quicker to the market, to test the market demand, but at the same time, also, how can we be able to get back into that product and actually replenish it quickly? So the other thing that's often underlooked is not just getting the product to market in the first place, but how quickly can you replenish it so that you can be able to turn that product more and more times over the season, especially if you are only relying based on if you're seasonal and you are relying on several months of opportunity to sell this, you want to be able to turn it around much, much quicker. This is why the pull system of supply chain would be so critical, because it will allow you, without humongous commitment ahead of time, without not knowing how your sell-throughs are going to be, to quickly get the customer demand data, analyze it, and then be able to produce it to the demand, depending on what the lead times would be, right? Assuming with the shipping as well, into whether it's going into the warehouse or potentially going directly to the consumer. And this is where I think going to be also important to look at the agility of your logistic and supply chain. Because often, we tend to fall into a traditional model where we place the order, we get the product from manufacturers, we get them into our warehouse and distribution, we get the order to our warehouse and distribution, and from there, whether we're using 3PL or whatever it is, we are sending things over. But a lot of times we look at how can we be able to make that more agile? Is there a way to potentially bypass your 3PL altogether? Is there potential to partner up with your manufacturer and see if they have a capabilities to actually process your orders and ship them directly to the customer? Not only are you going to save costs on shipping, but you're also going to save time on that you'll be able to fulfill those orders, and how quickly you can be able to turn those goods directly from the factory versus losing several weeks and sometimes months to actually getting them into your warehouse since staging it, right? So thinking about the agility on that end, I think is going to be also really important and upfront. So I just got another question that came in, which was really interesting, is, what are the biggest challenges businesses face when adopting lean principles, and how can I overcome it? And so this is a really great question, because the majority of the challenges that we're seeing when we want to adopt the lean principle is the resistance. And the resistance often comes from our resources, from our teams, from our factories, from our suppliers. And the only reason why that resistance usually there is because for them that means, or they think that has to mean, extra workload. And now I have to do more work. I have to potentially implement extra systems, learn the systems. Do I really want to do this? So there's constant resistance. Well, the way to overcome that is having a very transparent, not just the communication that we're going to do this, but actually get the buy-in of your key stakeholders who will be help be the advocates within your organization to promote lean thinking, right? To promote continuous improvement thinking. So having those discussions early on and have them be part of the solution that to arrive that this is going to be a better way to do this, right? Seeing the benefits, not just the benefits to the company, but as well as benefits to the consumer and potentially the humongous benefits to the actual resources that are going to be using these new processes as well. Because typically when we are getting into the lean kind of an agile field, we actually reduce, and if we put the right systems in place and animations, we actually reducing the manual workload and be able to now get those resources to focus on a much broader sizes of the business, or whether it's a supply chain or procurement or anything else that they're doing. Mario, have you guys curiously experienced anything like this in terms of the improvement? Or have you felt like any resistance when you guys have initially started to implement this continuous improvement thinking within your organization?
All the time. Honestly, when we made the transition to eyewear, you mentioned a great point as far as connecting with their manufacturer and see if you can you kind of X out like any like shipping deficiencies and anything like that. Like that was a key component that we went through with Incomparable because we use our areas of opportunity from because watches was our flagship. So when
Mm-hmm.
we make the transition to eyewear, it's more of a need. It's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily something that's a want, that's an accessory. It's something that we had a clear plan on ensuring that when we started with blue light and then we added our prescription eyewear and then we added our FSA and HSA. All of those things impacted our manufacturer relationship because we wanted to make sure that one, we always had product available. We always wanted to make sure that our shipping was between 1 to 5 business days for ready frame grasses and 10 to 14 business days for our prescription. But how can we minimize that, right? So where can we place our inventory just with our manufacturers that make our lenses and things like that? So having those conversations and that organization aspect before we even did a rollout was super important to us. And we faced a lot of pushback because one, they wanted to make sure that we had all of our ducks in a row as far as who we partnered with, where they were they in the US, were they not in the US, how is that process going to work as far as switching, we're getting our eyewear shipped to specific places to make sure that our customers get them in a timely fashion. How is that going to be? How can we present that to our stakeholders and everything like that to make sure that they see one, there's a market for it, two, there's a value for it, and three, we have all of our ducks in a row, the partnerships, the time frames, and ensuring that everything was dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And it was a new field for us because again, like we started with watches. So making sure that, we had our specific research done, that was important to us. We did face a lot of pushback at first.
Good. So I mean, it's good to learn this that this is the common challenge. So
Hmm.
thank you for the question. That just came in. That really, I think it's absolutely good to address that. Everybody's experiencing, and this is absolutely normal. And it's just the way that you would approach this, right? So one way is to mandate and kind of push it down the throat of our employees and researchers and saying this, or manufacturing partners, and saying this is what we were going to do, versus taking a different approach of getting them actually part of the solution, and coming up with these great ideas and really promote the collaboration, let people actually be able to express, down to the process users. Because what often we also see is that the decisions made, especially as we grow, they tend to be made within the executive circle, and then they push down to the process users. So when we get to the process users, they become resistant. They're like, well, I didn't ask for it. Why am I doing this? And a lot of times it's just not fully understanding why there's such a decision was made or how we're going to do this. But if you take an approach of, whether you do it through the Kaizen or whether you do that through regular check-ins, and having those cross-function process users, very critical that you have them all in the same room versus it just talking to a specific department in a silo, so that they can learn from the challenges of other departments. That's going to be very critical because that will prompt ideas of how they potentially can ease their pain point, as well as they will know that they are heard and other departments are also thinking of them, right? So that's number one. Number two, often when we create processes or we analyze efficiencies and we say, okay, this is what we're going to work on the executive level, we don't actually understand of what, or don't see it perhaps, that the process users are potentially altering the decisions of what we're doing and not able to use it one way or the other. So learning their challenges and efficiencies and bringing that into the executive roundtable within your organization together with them will really gonna help you to identify how you could get some of those bottlenecks and truly make the process optimized and simple to use for your process users and your teams. The other thing I kind of want to talk about in this particular case, before we start to wrap up our topic today, is how we are can be able to also foster the continuous improvement culture that supports long-term profitability and operational excellence. And we've talked a lot about some of those points already today. Having the consistent check-ins with your process users as well as with your teams cross-functionally. Have a system where you potentially meeting and creating a Kaizen, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's once a month, depending on what your business is, what your business needs, and what your efficiency needs are, right? And the more you do it, then better and efficient it's going to become, then less frequent you might potentially need to do it if you have control points in place. But really getting those feedback loops from the employee and creating more employee empowerment, right? Potentially, creating transparent matrix that drive sustainable progress, very critical. Also continuous improvement overall requires a company-wide mindset shift, right? Starting with leadership and trickling it down to your all of your employees. Regularly celebrating small wins. We often so hyper focused on big wins or KPIs that were set for the year that we forget to actually celebrate the small wins that we of the baby steps, right? If you think of a scrum or kind of agile project management, you don't get from the point, from beginning all the way to the end, and then you say hooray, but you actually in synthesize of the small wins that you're able to get you a step closer, right? And so that's what's going to get your teams being more encouraged to continue to stay with you and kind of grow with you and be able to provide their own feedback as well, knowing that they will be heard. And that's going to be very critical as well. One of our clients, chief operating officers, he implemented daily team check-ins to identify roadblocks in real time. And this reduced their project delays by 25%, right, within 6 months and improved their team alignment. I mean, just thinking about, again, different types of project management tools as well that can allow you to have these frequent check-ins and making them as efficient as well, because we all know meetings can be very daunting. And, some next thing you know, you from the morning to night in meetings and you didn't even get any work done. That could be very frustrating. So thinking about how do you do this efficiently? How do you put a maximum time on it? How potentially you have a pipeline of roadblocks or backlogs that you're communicating offline, right? Potentially there's a system for that. So that you could be able to address immediately the solutions on those quick check-ins, which would become more value-driven to everyone who is coming into that particular check-in versus being resistant to, hey, I have another meeting on the calendar. I don't know, or do you guys have kind of a similar, so you do guys mentioned that you're doing regular check-ins all the time and getting the feedback loop, not only from your customers, but employees. How did you guys solve for that so that it becomes efficient?
Really having an open-ended dialogue and really me being a active listener. I really aim to take away the titles when we have these open-ended dialogue sessions. I don't even like calling them meetings, if I'm being honest with you. We like to call them sessions.
That's
It's
it. Oh,
just
I like
a, a,
that.
Yeah, like a lot of our focus groups is just really making sure that everyone's voice is included, but we do have to keep it organized, right? A lot of the focus that we make sure that we hold everyone accountable for is just really staying on topic, one team, one task, and ensuring that we cultivate that just over the years. And I personally have weekly check-ins with my visual media director and my head of cultural management, and that matriculates down to our brand ambassador directors, and it matriculates down to our brand ambassadors. And people that work with other brands really do like that because one, it's kind of unorthodox and it's really kind of unheard of to really have that direct relationship with the CEO and the founder. I really try to make myself accessible. That really promotes, like you talked about, like that brand loyalty, that team loyalty, because making people feel included and making people see that you really are really focused on our main cultural aspect is where creatives dictate the culture. Like that's just our whole thing inside of Incomparable, and really making them feel heard and understood really helps to really have that language whenever we're speaking directly to our stakeholders, our manufacturers, and ultimately our customers, because we fostered that internally as opposed to just everything is just top down and it's just what I say. Just really have to welcome everyone's opinions, welcome everyone's focus, just as long as we stay one team and one task.
100%, absolutely. And one of the other things to kind of think about as we summarize our topic of discussion today is, what would be the immediate actions to save cost, right? Which one of them would be auditing your procurement or reducing inventory waste, which will create quick wins, right? It's thinking about what are the low-hanging fruit that you could be able to address first, and do it in phases. Don't try to come in and right away disrupt and say, we're going to, disrupt everything that we have. And don't disrupt anything until you know what your end-to-end process is, because you'll be very surprised. We just had a client that we signed on where they already full blown in the PLM implementation. They already doing SOPs for every department. But when I asked them, do you have an end-to-end process mapped out and reevaluated? And the answer was no. The question rises, then how do you think the PLM is gonna solve your problems when you don't even know where that PLM used to really play in within your process and help you to automate some of those things and efficiencies? And at the same time, how do you create SOPs when you need to first optimize your process, understand your process, optimize and then create your SOPs, right? Because you want them to be as efficient as possible. Otherwise, you're going to catch yourself constantly redoing things because you are treating just the symptoms. It becomes, I always like to visualize like a quilted patchwork blanket, right? And that's kind of what majority of our businesses operationally are. And the goal is to really get to something that's completely seamless and flows over really, really well over time. And that really becomes a foundation for you to scale. The other thing about is the long-term strategies, like adopting lean agile principles like we've talked about, and fostering culture of continuous improvement, driving sustainability, sustainable profitability increases within your organization. Operational excellence isn't one-time effort. It is a mindset, and it's commitment that needs to be consistently reinforced, not only through the leadership, but as well as along through the organization. I mean, great topic for any of those town hall meetings. I mean, that should definitely be a point of discussion. Well, I really had a great time, interacting with Mario. Thank you so much for your valuable input today, and everyone who were offline and sending the questions, fantastic questions. I will address the rest of the questions that wasn't able to address on the call in writing, so you will have that shortly as well after our call.